Alcatraz is one of the most famous prisons in the world, a small island in the middle of San Francisco Bay, a bare rock with an impenetrable fort on top. The prison operated for 29 years, but all that time it instilled terror in people who were afraid of little. They were gangsters, murderers, and kidnappers. The worst criminals in America were sent here without the pretensions of re-education that existed in other, more lenient prisons. It was believed that it was impossible to escape from here, but, of course, people still tried to do it. On the afternoon of April 27, 1936, Joseph Bowers, prisoner number 210, was throwing garbage into the incinerator in the prison courtyard. Suddenly, he abandoned the wheelbarrow he had taken with him and ran to the fence, ignoring the shouts. He even managed to climb over the fence. Then a shot rang out. Prisoner number 210 fell off a cliff, fell 15 meters and crashed to his death. In a sense, he achieved his goal, died outside the prison. This was the first documented escape attempt from Alcatraz. There will be 14 in total, and all but one will fail. Alcatraz Island is located 2 kilometers from the coast of California, right in San Francisco Bay, behind the famous Golden Gate Bridge. 2 kilometers is a ridiculous distance. The city is visible. The coast is on all sides. It would seem that you just jump in the water and swim, but this is a deceptive impression. The water in San Francisco Bay is icy, and the current is strong and carries you straight to the open sea, and sometimes the bay is covered in fog. So thick that you can't see your own hand, let alone the coast. The island itself is very small, 500 meters long and 180 meters wide. In the center, at the top, is the prison itself. A huge box of thick concrete with a single entrance. Along the perimeter there is a fence with barbed wire and guard towers. The guards have orders to shoot to kill. There is a steep cliff behind the fence. In some places it is 6 meters, in others it is 15 meters. Sometimes there are 3 guards per prisoner. Ordinary prisoners were not sent to Alcatraz. Those who finally got on the nerves of the authorities of other prisons were sent here. Psychopaths, sadists, rebels, and those prone to escape. Sinister rumors about the island spread very quickly in American prisons. Everyone knew what they did in Alcatraz. Beat, torture, make people sleep on the cold floor and so on. The cells were damp, without windows, and there was no place to hide. There were thick bars instead of doors. Many went crazy. There were cases of people chopping off their fingers with an axe so as not to work in the prison workshops. Suicides were a regular occurrence. The prison authorities acknowledged that the very existence of Alcatraz had a huge educational effect. The criminals simply called it the Rock. Obey the rules or you'll go to the Rock. It was an effective threat. And on the island, the local punishment cell, better known as the Hole, had the same terrible reputation. Dark stone bags where there was not even furniture. Prisoners were put there like pebbles. But what's funny is that there were also criminals who asked to go to Alcatraz voluntarily. These were those who loved to eat, suffered from bad prison food. Everyone knew that for some reason there was the best prison food in America. Of course, even in Alcatraz there were people who enjoyed special favor with the administration. For example, the legendary Al Capone served his 11-year sentence there. His cell was the same as everyone else's, damp, and without windows. But they brought him good furniture, a bed, an armchair, and even a bureau. He played the banya in a prison band and achieved great success in music. In addition to Capone, many other stars of the criminal world were in Alcatraz. For example, another gangster legend, Mickey Cohen, the king of the Los Angeles nightlife. Machine Gun Kelly also served time here. Not a modern rapper, no, a famous killer, cop killer. And kidnapper. He got his nickname for his virtuoso use of a Thompson submachine gun. There were dozens of lesser known, but no less cruel criminals. Mafiosi, raiders, bank robbers, thugs, bootleggers, and so on. Up to 300 people at a time. There were quarrels, fights, murders. The guards were fierce, and despite the fact that escape was considered impossible, and there were no successful escapes, people still tried to escape. Almost everything you saw in movies about prison escapes was first tried by desperate prisoners in Alcatraz. This year, the world's most popular puzzle, the Rubik's Cube, turned 50 years old. Half a century ago, it was invented by a young Hungarian teacher to explain three-dimensional geometry to students. It took her Norabik a whole month to solve the cube himself, while the current world record is only 3 seconds. And you don't need much time to connect cubes from MTS either, because it's very simple. Cubes are additional options that you can use to upgrade your tariff. In a couple of clicks, you can connect what you need in the MOMTS application. For example, choose a free cube protector to block spam calls or unlimited social networks, messengers, and video. You can also double the gigabytes of your tariff for free. For example, if you have 20 gigabytes in your tariff, then there will be 40. And now all tariffs include MTS Music, which means that you can listen to your favorite tracks without additional charges. Cubes are available to all MTS subscribers, so, friends, follow the link in the description for details and make your tariff even better with cubes from MTS. In 1937, two prisoners, Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe, realized that the prison workshops were less secure than the main building. They escaped from the workshops, simply sawed through the bars with stolen files and climbed out the window. They had tires to soften the jump from a 6-meter cliff and canisters to stay afloat. There was a thick fog, and they were not noticed from the towers. But the water temperature that day was 11 degrees. The fog that hindered the guards also hindered the escapees. It was unclear where to swim. Their bodies were never found. For some time, they appeared on the lists of the most wanted criminals, but are officially considered dead. The workshops were then rebuilt. In 1938, 3 prisoners decided to act more radically and attack the guards. They beat the guard with a crowbar, seized the gun, but somehow did not realize that there were several hundred more cops on the island. 2 of the escapees were shot. The third surrendered himself. In 1939, the famous gangster Arthur Barker, nicknamed Dog, and 4 of his friends sawed through the bars in the cells. It turned out that they had not been changed since the military prison, and they were made of mild steel. The outer bars were broken off with a homemade jack. The escapees managed to reach the shore, where they began to make fruit. But while they were wandering near the water in search of a tree, a guard from the tower noticed them and opened fire. The guard was given a bonus, and new bars were ordered from hardened steel. In 1941, a prisoner hid in a garbage container and managed to reach the shore. Everything seemed to be going well. The escapee found himself in the water and swam, and after about 5 minutes, he realized that he was freezing to death. He swam back with difficulty and surrendered to the guards. In 1943, prisoners attacked 2 guards and tied them up. While the criminals were breaking down the bars, the tied guards managed to raise the alarm. One crawled to the other and blew a whistle that was hanging around his colleague's neck. The guards opened fire on the escapees, who were already in the water and holding onto the stolen barrels. One of the survivors managed to hide in a cave on the shore. He sat there for 2 days, and then, starving, climbed back into the prison through the same window through which he had climbed out. Door. The war, uniforms for the American Army were sewn in the prison workshops. In 1945, one of the prisoners managed to steal a complete set of an army sergeant's uniform, and then, whistling at a leisurely pace, walked to the ferry on shore and boarded it. When disembarking from the ferry, everyone, of course, had their documents checked, which the costume sergeant, of course, did not have. The escapees drowned, got bullets, broke limbs, tried to build rafts, and even sew primitive diving suits. But the most cinematic escape happened on May 2, 1946. It is known as the Battle of Alcatraz. Several people participated in the escape attempt. The most dangerous were Bernard Coy and Joseph Kreitzer, both experienced gangsters. Coy was serving 25 years for robbing a bank, and Kreitzer was generally considered an enemy of the state by the FBI. Number 4. Coy studied the patrol routes for a long time until he literally knew them by heart. He also noticed that the gallery patrolled by an armed guard was separated from the prisoners only by a bar. And the gaps between the bars were quite large. On day X, there were 2 guards in the block, an unarmed one and an armed one. The unarmed one was distracted and strangled while the armed one was at another point on his route. When he returned, he was waylaid by Coy, who had been starving for months to squeeze through the bar. He got a bunch of keys, a rifle, and a pistol. With this set, Coy and his friends disarmed several more guards and released a dozen neighbors. However, having learned the escape plan, many returned to their cells. The plan was simple: fight their way to the boats. And it failed right away. Picking the keys to the locks, the gangsters inserted the wrong one, and the lock jammed, but no one raised the alarm yet. Moreover, at that very moment a new shift of guards entered the captured prison block. They were immediately taken into account and disarmed. Now the rioters had 8 hostages and a decent amount of weapons. The battle for Alcatraz lasted for 2 days. The prisoners fought back fiercely and had no intention of surrendering. On the second day, the prison authorities called in the army. American Marines, who had recently been fighting the Japanese on Okinawa, landed on the island. They threw grenades into the prison without hesitation. 5 people died. 14 were wounded. 2 of the survivors were executed in the gas chamber, and the third received a second life sentence. Security measures on Alcatraz were seriously tightened, and nothing like that ever happened there again. Until the legendary and still mysterious escape of 1962, known as the England Brothers Escape. A total of 4 people took part in the escape. Brothers John and Clarence England, Frank Morris and Alan West. It is worth noting that none of the 4 killed anyone. Morris dealt drugs and made a living by robbery. The Englands were engaged in burglaries and car thefts. West stole and also went to prison for car theft. They all ended up in Alcatraz for trying to escape from other prisons. Morris came up with a plan. He noticed that in Block B, where they were sitting, behind the concrete walls of the cells, there were old ventilation shafts. The concrete itself was also very old and not very strong. From a spoon, a melted silver coin and a vacuum cleaner motor, the prisoners made a drill. For a year, they drilled into the wall. They could work for an hour a day when music was broadcast over the prison loudspeakers. The hole was masked with plugs made from a mixture of newspapers, water, and glue. West Morris spent several months bartering rubberized raincoats and jackets with other prisoners, from which they sewed a raft. From the same newspaper papier-mâché had made, they made bales the size of a human body and painted copies of their heads. Moreover, the heads had real hair, stolen from the prison barbershop. On the night of June 11 to 12, 1962, the most famous escape in the history of Alcatraz PRE. Sun began. The fake bodies were covered with blankets and fake heads were placed on the pillows. The England brothers and Maurice got out into the tunnel. West did not climb, either he did not have time or he chickened out. It is from him that we know the details of the escape. The ventilation tunnel was very narrow, only a meter wide. First, they had to climb 10 meters up it, climb out onto the roof and then go down the pipe. The 3 escapees reached the water, inflated their rubber fruit with the bellows of an accordion, which they stole from an amateur group and swam away. No one ever saw them again. According to the official version, they died at sea. On the far shore, the police found a wallet wrapped in plastic. It contained the addresses and photographs of the England's relatives. A homemade life jacket with a broken valve and scraps of rubberized material were also dangling there. The FBI's conclusion: all 3 drowned, or did they? In 2011, the National Geographic Channel reported that there was another FBI report declassified only recently, and it follows from it that the fetus was found after all. Moreover, it was dragged from the shore into the thicket and there were tracks leading from it. It is also known that on June 13, 1962, near San Francisco Bay, 3 unknown people stopped a car, threw the driver out of it, and disappeared. After the Englands' escape, someone began regularly sending their mother flowers and then beautiful postcards from South America. In 1973, when she died, 2 strange women who looked like men in disguise were seen at the funeral. In 2013, the FBI received a letter allegedly from John Anglin. John claimed to have cancer and wanted to return home. He offered the following terms. He would be given a year in prison, but would be treated. The FBI considered the letter to be fake. In 2020, the Irish Business Post reported that a new Irish facial recognition system had found a photo from 1975 in its database.
The photo from Brazil showed two smiling men in sunglasses.
With a probability of 97%, the algorithm identified them as John and Clarence Anglin.
Alcatraz prison was closed in 1963.
A year after the famous escape, it turned out to be very expensive to maintain. The building quickly deteriorated from wind and seawater.
Since 1983, the Alcatraz Escapes Triathlon has been held annually in the vicinity of the island.
Participants must swim 2.5 kilometers from the island to the shore. Then a 29 kilometers bike race and a 13 kilometers run.
Every year someone succeeds in doing this. The Alcatraz Escapes Triathlon is a very expensive car. The Alcatraz Escapes Triathlon is a very expensive car. The Alcatraz Escapes Triathlon is a very expensive car. The Alcatraz Escapes Triathlon is a very expensive car. The Alcatraz Escapes Triathlon is a very expensive car. The Alcatraz Escapes Triathlon is a very expensive car. The Alcatraz Escapes Triathlon is a very expensive car.